On this week's 51%, we speak with author Michelle Horton about the concept of criminalized survivors and her new memoir recounting her side in the high-profile murder case that sentenced her sister to prison in 2020.
I really thought this was like a wild, insane thing that only happened to us. And it was very quickly that I learned that this is how the criminal justice system responds when victims of abuse fight back and survive.
I'm Jesse King. It's all up next on 51%.
I was standing around like one of those girls I had seen in a movie. The whole world was a movie back then. I had my sunglasses on, I wanted to be seen without seeing shy Lolita. I wasn't really in it, I didn't really get it.
You're listening to 51%, a WAMC production dedicated to women's issues and experiences. Thanks for joining us. I'm Jesse King. Today we're going to talk about a term that is relatively new to me, and that term is criminalized survivors. The American Civil Liberties Union said in 2006 that the vast majority of women in prison have been victims of domestic violence, sexual assault, or child abuse, and that as many as 90% of women in prison for killing men had previously been battered by those men. Our first guest believes her sister is among them. Michelle Horton is the older sister of Nicole Nikki Armando. In 2020, Armando was convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to 19 years to life in prison for killing Christopher Grover, her partner and the father of her 2 children. Armando told police in Poughkeepsie, New York, that she shot and killed Grover in self-defense after years of physical and sexual abuse. Since the murder in 2017, Horton has been raising Armando's children alongside her son and took on the task of helping them cope not only with the loss of their father, but the imprisonment of their mother. That is, until recently. In 2021, an appellate judge reduced Armando's sentence under New York's Domestic Violence Survivors Justice Act. That, plus some credit for good behavior, means Armando was released from prison just a few weeks ago. Now, Horton is releasing a book on their story called Dear Sister, a memoir of secrets, survival, and unbreakable bonds. This was a really divisive case here in New York's Hudson Valley. Grover was never charged with domestic abuse, and his family contests Armando's claims, saying he was killed instead in cold blood. Armando says Grover threatened to kill her before she shot him, but the prosecution argued Grover was asleep in his final moments. The case has also been a frequent subject of true crime fanatics in recent years, with an episode of 2020 and its own podcast simply titled Believe Her. Horton says the purpose of Dear Sister isn't to rehash the case, but to provide a glimpse of the emotional impact it had on her, her family, and Armando's children.
I was a writer before this happened. It's kind of how I've always processed and also like the skill that I've developed professionally. But I had this incredible experience that was paradigm shifting, and I learned a lot. And I witnessed a lot that for a really long time, I was not able to publicly talk about because there was litigation. Anything that I said publicly could be used against my sister in the courtroom. And then also in a correctional facility, there could be retaliation. Silencing people is a very effective tactic that the court system uses. And I was not willing to do anything that could further harm my sister. But myself and a community around us were witnessing things that were not reflected in the public narrative of my sister's case.
How would you describe your relationship with your sister? What were you guys like growing up? Because I know when I think of my little brother, he's like 25 now, but for some reason I always picture him at age 13, 14 years old, because that's when we were really still living together.
Well, our relationship as kids was very different than how it is. I think it was just a very typical relationship where she was my little sister. So she's always young to me in my mind. And we played together and we had bonding and we also had rivalry and bickering. It just, to me, seemed just like quintessential sisterhood that you see reflected in the media or, sitcoms. But there was always a bit of an emotional distance between us. And then when she became a mother, that's when I feel like I really got to know who she is, on a soul level, was seeing her as a mother, because she just emerged as this new woman who, and I was new because I was a mother now, and we just kind of matured and grew closer together. So like when I think about my sister, I really actually think about her in that time period as a new mom. And I, to me, just her and motherhood are so intrinsically linked together that I think of us as children as like a different lifetime.
The way you start the book, actually, I thought it was interesting because, you don't start things at the start of the case, at the time of the murder, per se. You actually start it with the end of your own marriage and you leaving your own relationship. And, it starts with a scene of your kids and Nikki's kids playing in the backyard before everything, just being together. Tell you a little bit about why you decided to start it that way.
Truth be told, I started the book about 4 different ways. That was always part of it though, because that's how I
Mhm.
lived it, is that I I thought the hardest experience I was ever going to have was leaving my marriage. It was a tumultuous marriage. It was unhealthy for me, but we had a child together, and it's really hard to untangle. Well, I can speak for myself. It was very hard to untangle myself from that. It took a long time to leave, and I thought it was the most courageous thing I ever did, was to really make the self-honoring choice to leave that marriage. And it was a basically exactly a year after our marriage ended that everything happened with Nikki. So that was just a huge part of my perspective, that I had gone through this experience and I came out on the other side, basically like exhaled, and then this next thing happened to me. That's just where I was in my life.
Well, looking back on that day in September of 2017, how did this all start for you? How did you find out that Nikki was charged with homicide and that you or someone was going to have to step in and watch her children?
Yeah, it was a slow unfolding throughout, and basically an entire day. It started with police coming to my door and saying, "Are you Nikki's sister? Someone needs to go pick up her kids at the police station." I had known that a CPS report was made, alleging that her partner was abusing her and they were concerned about the kid's safety, which I was like, that's wild. Like, that's not going to go anywhere. Like, my sister had bruising on her sometimes, but there was always a reason. And someone was just being like, I don't know, worried, which is fine, but they're going to do the investigation and it will be, it will all go away. So when the police came to the door, I thought maybe it had something to do with that. So my mom went to go get the kids. I went to work. And it was like throughout the day that it just started to be like, what's happening? Where's Chris, her partner? Why is she still at the police station? And then it was 5 o'clock that day that my mom texted me and just said homicide. And it was just like reality flipped on its head. It made no sense. I didn't understand. And then it was after that a friend of hers came to me and let me in on all of the things I hadn't seen, and that my sister didn't just like snap and go crazy and murder the father of her children. My sister is like the least violent person I had ever met. But that she was protecting herself and saving her own life.
I was going to ask because, you knew Nikki and Chris as a couple for a long time, and there was a lot of photographic evidence of abuse that ended up being shown at the trial. Did you recognize the signs back then in the years leading up to the case? It sounds like there were hints, but that the realization didn't really come until later.
Yeah, I mean, in hindsight, I did. So as soon as her friend Elizabeth told me that he had been hurting her, it was like everything clicked and everything made sense. And all of the bruising I had seen, her shoulder was dislocated recently and she was wearing a sling. I mean, when I go through it in the book, I can understand from the outside it looks insane that how didn't you put these pieces together? But I was just, I don't know, I was just too close to the situation to really like put it together. And there was such an escalation in violence towards the end of their relationship. I had known them as a couple for 9 years. And I didn't notice anything. And it really was only within the last year or so that the signs of abuse became visible. And I just didn't think something like that could happen to her or to our family.
So you end up taking in Nikki's kids, and all of a sudden you're dealing with this court case and sort of the media storm that came out of it, while also having to be almost like a single parent to 3 kids at the same time. How did you go about deciding to break the news to your niece and nephew about what was going on? That not only had their father died, but they weren't going to be able to see their mother either.
That was the hardest part, is because we didn't really have concrete information. I mean,
Yeah.
even the first few days, weeks even, we really couldn't. It wasn't even like we were withholding information. We didn't know. We didn't know when she'd be back. We didn't really understand the legal system. No one in my family had ever gone through anything like this. So we really had to deep dive into what it even meant to be going through a criminal investigation and hiring defense attorneys. And it was all so new. And there was such a learning curve for all of us that there weren't a lot of answers to give. The only thing I could tell them, which I did eventually, was that their dad died. And that was very hard. But to tell them where their mom was, why, and when she'd be coming back, it was really complicated. And it took a really long time to give them concrete details.
And your parents? How did your whole family cope throughout this?
It just became all encompassing. I mean, it was like, it was a full on family tragedy. So, with that came a tremendous amount of support and help from people around us, like friends, people I hadn't spoken to in years, distant family. Like, people came out of the woodwork to help us. So that lightened the load. But the first, like, I want to say even 6 months of it were just pure adrenaline I was running on. Um, it just became a new normal for us. And we acclimated the way, people do. But yeah, to say it was difficult is an understatement.
Well, looking back on it, although I know it's not the very distant past right now, what would you say is the biggest lesson that you took away from this experience, be it about yourself, the judicial system as a whole, or domestic violence or relationships?
Well, I think one of the biggest things I learned, and the hardest things to accept, is how common this is. I really thought this was like a wild, insane thing that only happened to us. And it was very quickly that I learned that this is how the criminal justice system responds when victims of abuse fight back and survive across the board. I have not seen a case. I mean, this is happening literally right now all over the country. They're aggressively prosecuted. Their evidence of abuse is not admissible. Their character is decimated on the stand. The prosecution will plant false narratives. It's just, this is actually very textbook what happens. And at the same time, I learned how, I knew in a sense what domestic violence was and how common it is, but I didn't realize how deadly it becomes and how many women are killed. Like, we live in a country where 3 women are killed every day. We average 11 murder suicides a week, and we know this from looking at the news. Like, I'm sure all of us can like recount recent things of families being murdered. It's always like, oh my gosh, how did this happen? This couldn't happen here. They always looked like such a nice family. And it's like this epidemic that no one really talks about. So those 2 things of seeing like how common domestic violence homicides are and how common it is for the criminal justice system to respond with punishment.
Nikki was initially sentenced to 19 years to life in prison, but she's actually out now. She was released on parole a few weeks ago. What to you was the biggest factor in her release?
First of all, the Domestic Violence Survivors Justice Act, which is a law only in New York, which took a decade of advocacy to pass. And it actually was denied by the judge the first time. I write about it all in the book. But without that law, to finish my thought, the appellate court reduced her sentence. They said that she was a victim and could be resentenced under this law, which basically gives a lower sentencing structure for victims. So with my sister's conviction, the sentencing range was at the lowest 15 years to life, which means at 15 years, she was eligible to go to the parole board. They could keep her for life, all the way up to 25 years to life. Under the DVSJA, the lowest was 5 years, up to 15 years, no life. So it's, it's not like there's still jail time, and that's still terrible, but it salvages their life. So without that law, she would still be in prison. And I'm very grateful for all of the advocates who worked for so many years to get it passed. And without an incredible pro bono appellate team through Sullivan and Cromwell, who poured like millions of dollars into this that we didn't have to pay for, and all of the advocacy that our committee did. I was part of the Nicole Adamando Community Defense Committee, and we were really loud, and we fought for a really long time, and we made a lot of public awareness about her case. So those three things really played a part in her coming home.
And so how are things now? I imagine the focus is probably on rebuilding for the most part.
Yeah, I mean, it's really like we have the opportunity to move forward now with safety, which, obviously my sister experienced a lack of safety both in her home and in the prison system in a way that is completely different than the rest of us. But, all of us, myself and the three kids and my dad and anyone who cared about Nikki, really being entangled in the correctional facility life in any way is just like this underlying feeling of degradation and unsafety. So this is really the first time we can move forward and start healing and establish like our own family. And she was always part of our family. The kids stayed connected to her, which I write about in the book, how they were able to do that. So it's not like they're just meeting her for the first time, like they know her, and they are so happy to like be able to snuggle with her and have her bring them to school and meet their friends. So we're all just really excited about the future, while also acknowledging my sister has a tremendous amount of healing, and we're just here to support her through that.
Well, Michelle, thank you so much for taking the time. Lastly, what do you hope readers most take away from Dear Sister?
What I wanted to do was bring people into the emotional lived experience of what it felt like to go through this, so that maybe people could understand it in a way that just reading about statistics maybe doesn't hit them. Like I wanted to hit home. And so if that happens, that would be wonderful. And then if they can take those feelings, whether it's rage or inspiration or heartbreak, and use that to take action in their communities. Because if there's one thing that I learned is that you don't need to like completely tear down the system at once to make a difference. You can really make a difference by showing up to these events, getting involved in your local domestic violence shelters, just opening your eyes to what's happening in your own backyard, because I promise you there are women who are unsafe and need people to believe them, and they need people to stand with them vocally, and just give what you can to help.
Michelle Horton is the sister of Nicole Adamando, who was sentenced to 19 years to life in prison for killing her partner in what she claimed was self-defense in 2017. An appellate judge reduced Adamando's sentence under New York's Domestic Violence Survivors Justice Act in 2021, and she is now out on parole. Horton's new memoir detailing the impact of the case on her life is out now through Grand Central Publishing, called Dear Sister, a memoir of secrets, survival, and unbreakable bonds. If you or someone you love has been impacted by domestic violence, please know that help is available. You can reach the National Domestic Violence Hotline by texting START to 88788, calling 1-800-799-SAFE, or at thehotline.org. Michelle, thanks again.
Thank you for having me.
More than 25,000 Palestinians have been killed in the latest Israel-Hamas war, according to health officials in Gaza. Fighting in the region reignited on October 7th when the terrorist organization Hamas killed more than 1,200 Israeli citizens and took hundreds more hostage in a brazen attack. Israel's widespread bombing of Gaza in the months since, however, has prompted worldwide protests and accusations of genocide. The highest court of the United Nations recently ordered Israel to take action to prevent genocide, but stopped short of demanding a permanent ceasefire. As of this taping, another temporary ceasefire is currently being negotiated to release hostages. This is a fast-changing and a heated issue on both sides, and I should note that our last segment today provides some insight to one of those sides. Nagam Ayad is a Palestinian student studying human rights and international law at Al-Quds Bard College, a dual-degree partnership between Bard College in New York and Al-Quds University in the Abu Dis area of Jerusalem. That's in the West Bank, not Gaza. Before Ayad, the conflict between Israel and Palestine has shaped much of her life. Ayad spoke with our associate producer, Jody Cowan, toward the end of 2023 to share her perspective on the war and her approach to activism at this time.
I would like to start by saying my experience is about obstacles, restrictions, checkpoints, violations, imprisonments, oppressions, and no freedoms. I was born in Abu Dis, which is, as I said before, a small town nearby Jerusalem, but I could not go to Jerusalem because I need a permission to go to my country, So I don't have a permission to enter Jerusalem as they need a medical permission, and it's so difficult to have one. And just right now, the Israeli occupation decided to, ignore all of that and to cancel all the permission to all the Palestinians who's living in the West Bank. So it is impossible to go to Jerusalem right now. And my experience, I grew up in this small town in Abu Dis, which is all surrounded by the apartheid wall. And since October 7th, I was not able to leave my town. I was not able to go to Al-Quds University. And before October 7th, when I was, for example, 13 years old, one day at 3 a.m., Israeli occupation decided to break into our house. And they have arrested my father in front of my eyes, and they were just holding the gun in front of my face to not move. And I was a child. My brother grew up having this trauma. At the same time, they have arrested my grandfather, my uncle, my father. So, yeah, till now, the university is closed. We have been meeting in Zoom sessions, in Zoom classes, and talking about Palestinian issues, about Palestine, because it's impossible to forget about what's happening because it's genocide.
You study human rights and international law at Al-Quds University. How are these classes currently being taught in the face of warfare at your literal doorstep?
I grew up learning about human rights because, I grew up between all these violations. So I have built this great passion and a huge passion towards this field. I want the voice of my people to be heard. And that's why I entered this major and this university. So since October 7th, I became aware that I can do nothing, even though I'm studying this in this field. But I can do nothing, even though there's a United Nations, there's human rights treaties, there's everything. So I have been losing my passion every day. And people around me are telling me, just change your major, go to study something else. I don't know what to do. You can see that I can't do anything except speaking up. So since October 7th, the professors in my college, AQB, they have changed the syllabus to be only about the Palestinian cause, to talk about the Palestinian prisoners, for example, to talk about the situation here, to talk about all the violation that has been happening in the West Bank, in Jerusalem, in Gaza. So we have changed the whole program into the Palestinian cause to shed the light on it. So it was difficult. Most of our professors are from the West, from other countries, from Europe, from America. So they were not understanding what is happening in Palestine. So there is a course I'm taking. It is political communication. And we have been talking about the propaganda, about the media bias and everything. And the professor were telling me that, okay, but Israel is having 40 beheaded babies. And it turned out that all of these are just, propaganda. They are just fake news. So it was difficult for me to just convincing the professor that this is not even true. So the professors were also educating themselves from us. We were just talking about what's happening, telling them about the news, and every single day, sending them emails, doing sessions. So the professors were collaborative in that, and they were just asking a lot of information about what's happening. It was like, okay, I'm living through it, but I have to speak up because I have to let them know what is the truth about what's happening.
And you've taken on this responsibility to keep sharing your experience. How have you been able to use your voice outside of your studies?
So I have been going through a lot of advocacy sessions. I have gone to a scholarship, for example, in Budapest. So I have a lot of international friends, as I have went, for example, for France twice. So I wanted to use my voice just to let them hear us. So I decided just to make like a page on Instagram, which is Voice of Palestine, and I have started sharing a lot of on this page. And there were like a lot of questions from many people came and asking about Palestinian cause, asking about what's happening to the Palestinian prisoners, for example, about the truth, about everything. I thought that, okay, I'm doing something here. Like I'm letting the people know what's happening here. And it's, it is my role to do that. So I have started sharing about what's happening in my Instagram stories, in my page on Instagram, and sending my friends like what's happening and keep them just aware of everything that has been happening and telling them stories. Even my friends in Gaza, she was telling me, okay, send me pictures of the people demonstrations. Like, okay, it makes her feel like better and hope.
I was connected to you through student activists at Bard College near where I am here in New York's Hudson Valley. What is your relationship to the campus here, and how have they helped support your cause?
So we have been doing like these groups between like students in AQB and students in the Bard College, and we're just educating each other about Palestine. I have known some informations about Palestine I did not know before from them. So we have done like this collaborations between students, between professors, and they were really supportive to us towards this. And even the professors at Bard College, Al-Quds Bard, they were just so supportive because like some of them are not from Palestine, not from the Arabic world. They are from just, New York, America, British people. So they have been really collaborative with us through these times. Like they were educating us toward these violations, what to do. They have told us that ICC opened an investigation about all the Israeli crimes. They were just really supportive in that point. So I appreciate that, really.
What are some things that you can share with us today about the Palestinian people, about your culture? What is it that we should know?
So I want to speak up about the Palestinian symbols. It is like it represents our identity, our history, and culture, all of them. So we have this like handala. So it is like a cartoon character, and it was created by Naji al-Ali, who was murdered by Israeli occupation because he used his pen and his pencil. Handala is like a young guy. He represents the Palestinian refugees, and he was born at 10 years old, and he will remain this age until his country is liberated from the occupation. So Hamdallah basically embodies Naji al-Ali, who was murdered, as I said, by the occupation. So as Naji al-Ali, when he was 10 years old, his family were forcibly displaced in 1948 during the Nakba, and they went to a refugee camp in Lebanon, which is Ain al-Hilwa. So then Hamdallah started to appear in the Palestinian, pages and history, like in 1967, in 1969. So Hamdallah became like a symbol of Palestinian resistance. Until this day, we use it as a Palestinian resistance, as a symbol. And then I know that most of you know the kufiya and wear the kufiya as like supporting Palestinians. So it became like symbol of Palestinian identity and solidarity and resistance. So it has like patterns which is like all together carry a powerful story of Palestinian resilience, as there's a bold line which represents the trade routes. It also represents the walls that all Palestine surrounded by it, like the apartheid wall, as I said before, it's like 8 meters. And the olive leaves, which represent like the Palestinian connection to their land. So during 1936 and 1939, when the Palestinians were under like British colonial, the kafiyya began to take its like political meaning, and people started wearing it. So we wear kafiyya all the time. And now in Palestine, we can't wear it in the West Bank because if we wear it, we'll get arrested. So even the sample, we can't wear it. And many Palestinians carry the key of their old homes till now, since 1948, 1967. And which represent their right to return to their homes, and it's a symbol of the right of the refugees. I always want to talk about like the Palestinian symbols. And there's also the watermelon, because the Palestinian flag were prohibited in 1967. So people in Palestine decided to just carry a watermelon, which has like red and black and white and green, which is the colors of the Palestinian flag, to show like resistance. Even in the media, because our stories don't show up to the world because of, the media bias and the propaganda. We bought like a watermelon as algorithm break just to get more viewers and to see our stories.
Nagam, thank you for your time. Is there anything else you'd like us to know about your experience in the West Bank?
You can do something. You are powerful. Your posts matter. Your stories matter. Your voice matters. Keep educating yourself and keep educating others.
That was Nagam Ayad, a student of Al-Quds Bard College in Jerusalem, sharing her experience with our associate producer, Jody Cowan. For a range of perspectives on this ever-changing issue, you can check out more of WAMC stories at WAMC.org. Thanks for joining us for this week's 51%. 51% is a national production of WAMC Northeast Public Radio in Albany, New York. It's produced and hosted by me, Jesse King. Our associate producer is Jody Cowan, and our theme is Lolita by the Albany-based artist Girl Blue. Just a reminder that you can listen to 51% anytime at WAMCpodcasts.org or wherever you get your podcasts. And you can stay in the loop on all of WAMC's shows by signing up for our weekly newsletter Airwaves at WAMC.org. We hope you'll join us next week. Until then, I'm Jesse King, 51%.
I was every single girl, I was nobody else, I was so sure of myself. I was 15 and a half, he was a hollow laugh. And I lost my cool somewhere along the way. The nightmare down the hallway, I had to learn how to look away. I lost my cool, no electricity, hot rain on the concrete, sweet melting little girl dreams. They said, oh, I want a big life, not a house that could have been like. Where are you taking me? Where are you taking me? They said,